Julo looked at the proposal one more time before looking at the human across from him.
Explain why you need nearly 5 square kilometers of space to complete this project. It is an in-fault gateway with standard dimensions. I am failing to see why you need that much area.
Jericho scratched his beard, as he realized it was going to be one of those discussions. You are aware this is a piece of cutting-edge Class 5 technology you want, correct? Even with Class 6 tech, it takes a fair amount of space and time to build one. Julo was obviously aware of this fact, but felt it was entirely unrelated to the current discussion.
You are a human, though. It is unknown to us what class your species even is. Our best calculations place your species as a post-Class 9 society.
Jericho managed to get an itch in his beard just right, and sighed. He also sighed at the being across from him. If he wasn't personally interested in testing out a new idea for an in-fault gateway, he wouldn't even be here. It's not like he couldn't make one himself at home. It just rankled him to make something like that for no reason, and let it go to waste afterwards. So here he was, dealing with a new Class 5 species that could barely handle in-fault technology on their own, much less something as ambitious as he wanted to do with it. Not the point. What is important is the space I need for my forge. Without that much space, I cannot do it. Don't worry about the final location, I will do the final assembly on site. Julo blinked, and felt himself stiffen in shock at the human's casual declaration. Final assembly on site indeed. Only a great race such as the humans could build an in-fault gateway and move it after partial assembly. The first part of making one was locking it into place in relation to its position in the universe. You couldn't move one once construction started without a supernova. Humans. Truly godlike beings. Julo just approved the request, figured trying to understand such beings was well beyond his comprehension. Jericho was happy the being had not started asking much more questions. He was testing a working theory, and was fairly sure it would work, but had to test it to make sure. While Julo's people may only be newly ascended Class 5s, they were still beings. As such, they still had rights under the Bill of Rights all humans had to agree to. Otherwise, it would be simple enough to steamroll over the lower levels and become godlike overlords, not happening with humanity. They had fought their way from Class 2 to their current deck level, destroying every smug self-entitled asshole who used their superior tech to lord over lower tech races. So Jericho thanked the being, after getting the needed space granted. Lodu stared at the new complex that was rumoured to be the human's workshop. He had spent most of the last 2 days since it arrived walking around it, seeing if he could find anything special about it. He had been drawn to it by some strange feeling that tugged on his mind. There was a light hum of sound that seemed to come from the building. The sound had shifted slightly over the last few days, though recently it seemed to be building towards something. It was a sudden shift, but he saw and felt it happen. Green flames burst from over 12 towers, followed by huge clouds of purple smoke that dissipated swiftly. There was a high-pitched sound that pierced the air with the green flames. As the smoke faded, the next group of green flames burst free. This time, a rolling deep sound joined in. Soon the flames were bursting back and forth, as the sounds began to speed up. It was a hypnotic mix of sounds that stirred something deeply primal within him. As the day wore on, he felt himself moving to this weird musical set of notes that were coming from the human place. Soon, he had lost himself entirely to the feelings as the music grew to take over his body completely. As the music reached a high point, he suddenly felt it die down. His whole body seemed to be releasing itself from the frantic energy he had built up, and he had no way to process this mentally. Standing there, he felt his mind trying to make sense of what was going on, completely unaware as the human came out of his workshop and guided him inside. Eventually he broke free from his stupor to see a glass of some strange drink in his hand, mostly empty. The human was sitting across from him and staring at him intently. "Well, you've put me in a hell of a bind now. Even among Class 9 and up societies, you are more rare than I would care to admit." Lodu had no idea at all what was going on. I was not afraid to admit so. "I do not understand. What do you mean?" "Audiopass is the most common name for it, the gift. Unfortunately, it is completely useless for any species below Class 9. Lodu wondered what it meant, though it seemed like normally this information would be useless to him. However, he had picked up on the fact that the human had said he was in a bind. Perhaps this meant there was the possibility of something not normal happening. Alright kid, here's the deal. I'm going to kick this whole operation down to a lower beat. If you can stay coherent, then we will talk. Jericho stood and had Lodu follow him. Murphy, his forge spirit, was already tracking the changes that would need to be made and adjusting the equipment. Spirits were not some mystical hocus-pocus. They were incredible beings who were of the natural intelligence class. Forces of nature that had gotten something somewhere to line up correctly. Murphy had been found alone in the void as a rouge planet-sized rock. The carbon lattice structure that filled the planet had shifted and formed a rudimentary sapient life form. Jericho had spent years refining the intelligence of Murphy, while ensuring the core in his being was unaltered. Murphy had been with him ever since, and they were great friends. Hopefully sometime in the next century, Murphy would take that step into independence and forge his own mobile body. Murphy lowered the clockwork platform, as he was sure Lodu would not be able to handle anything more intense. It was a system that slowly built up in power, though it stayed steady throughout. Even this setup would require oversight and guidance from Jericho for Lodu to even have a chance of making it work. Jericho was not looking for skill or anything here. Simply, he wanted to see what the lad could notice, and attempt to do so while under the trial of crafting. Jericho set up the brake hammering gear with the primary cog. The gearforge was aligned and he took his place to oversee and guide the lad. Alright, right now I'm working on a modified subspace relay. Once it starts, you should be able to feel what to do. Let's start. Lodu suddenly found a crank in each hand, with him standing on the teeth of a really wide cog. None of this made any sense at all. Subspace relays were built by automated systems that needed attoscale precision. He was currently looking at a hammer and a sparky needle attached to some gears and pivoting arms. The subspace relay was laid out in front of them, and Lodu was really wondering what the hell was going on, until it happened. A near silent but steady building beat seemed to reach him. He felt his hands clasp the handles in preparation of something. Then it started to reach a deeper level, and he moved his hands. Cranking them back and forth, he realized he was now pushing the music further. He began to add breaks and adjust the feel of the musical sounds. It hit him like a supernova suddenly, and he stretched out his leg, stomping a foot on the cog he was standing on. It began turning, and each step he took was in place with the musical sounds he was creating. Then he was aware of a subspace relay in front of him. He could feel the atoms, the twists in space, the place it existed in the universe just from the sounds he was making. The sounds of the universe itself guiding him. He could feel the beat was out of line. There was a string when the notes were off. He cranked the hammer cog and brought it down on the relay. The sound guiding the sour notes into place. It wasn't right, and he spent time getting it right. Cranking the handles back and forth to the beat of the sounds, he could feel it all. Shift forward, step left, crank hard, step right, step left, shift back, crank both reverse soft. It was a melody of action that was singing with his soul. He lost track of time as he kept finding notes that didn't line up correctly and repairing them. He was making the sound whole once again, creating a sheet of sound that would form a music all on its own. Sometime, the notes needed shifted with the hammer. Other times they needed to be rewritten with the pen. That one took him the longest to work with and get right. He spent untold amounts of time just getting a feel for that pen. Eventually, the whole relay sang to him, and he was satisfied. The music of the sounds reached a deep note so heavy, it brought him to his knees. Yet he pushed through it and finished the sound wave of completion with a sharp cry of triumph. Suddenly, he found himself once again being walked around with a human. This time at least, he was coherent and could handle himself soon enough. Alright boy, you impressed me. If you weren't so talented, I would leave you here. This is going to be a complete shit show. Still, I will ask, do you want to apprentice under me? Lodu had secretly hoped something like this could possibly happen, but had not realistically expected it to happen. To train under a human, to learn more about what it meant to be an audiopath. This was something that dreams and legends were made of. Yes! Jericho nodded, as he would have been massively surprised if anything else had happened. Alright, for now stay in here and drink that pitcher. Once you have finished it, I will come get you. I'll let you watch me work. You won't get anything from it for learning, but the experience should be good for you. Jericho stood up and sent a thought line to Murphy. They passed ideas back and forth, until he found himself laughing. Yes, he had given the lad an entire picture of audiopathic blocker. It was the only way the lad would stay sane and coherent as he worked. Even on the other side of the planet, the waves from his workshop would have fed the lad. It was part of the reason he had started with such a simple piece, so if in the extremely remote, near impossible odds, an audiopath was on the planet, he could identify them and take precautions. That there had been one was next to impossible. Most species couldn't even spawn an audiopath without reaching Class 9. Their biology simply was not advanced enough to handle it. That this Class 5 species had one was incredibly rare. The possible talent level the lad had was nothing to sneeze at either. He would have to take the next few decades off at least just to train the lad so he was apprentice level. This was going to be a mess. Murphy was finding humour in the situation Jericho was finding himself in. Jericho was constantly finding beings that were overlooked by the universe at large. Murphy had been thinking about forging a body to explore the universe in a more mobile way recently. However, he was now willing to wait to see the hijinks that would come about for the next few decades. While contemplating the no doubt fun events of the future, Murphy released the Gear Forge and started arranging the Sonic Forge. There were no guides or overseer marks like the Gear Forge. This would be entirely on the skill and power of Jericho. Murphy wanted to show Lodu the sheer power available to an audiopath. The unspoken challenge to Jericho would push the old man to reach farther into his skills than he had in recent years. The old man would want to show off a bit for his soon-to-be apprentice. As such, Murphy was going to take full advantage of this and was rolling out the Sonic Forge. The people of this planet were going to get one hell of a deal for their gateway. A peak-level audiopath forging with a master-tier Sonic Forge. That was like hiring an entire university research department to help you with your 5th grade history report. He set aside the relay as memento for Lodu's first work. Pulling top-shelf materials from storage, Murphy chuckled to himself. This gateway would be a head-scratcher for any Class 7 and above species who found it. The damn thing would be worth more than the entire solar system was, just from materials alone. Still, it would be great to see Jericho really cut loose and forge with his full potential again. The man had reached a level where it was rarely needed for anything he did. Jericho saw the setup Murphy had laid out with the materials selected. He let out a chuckle as he figured out what game Murphy was up to. Make sure to set up a safety area for the lad to observe from. Last thing we need is for him to be shredded by the forge. Murphy began doing so, as he had not thought of that. They never had an audience for the Sonic Forge before. It was a simple oversight, but one he would strive to remember. Jericho changed from the levers he'd been wearing into something more appropriate for the Sonic Forge. He was feeling like being a bit fancy and really showing off for the new lad. Murphy, bring up the fault and enable the luminous supplemental system. I'm going to have fun with this. As shock and surprise filled Murphy, he still proceeded to unlock the vault and bring it out. This masterwork of bore and crafting was an audiopath's dream come true. An audiopath wearing their mastercraft clothing was an expression of their sound and force of nature. Jericho had created his set that was officially declared an off-limits weapon by every party, even slightly in the know. Essentially, he was immune from the majority of political bullshit that existed, as no one wanted to face him. Murphy realized how intense this was going to get, so he did 2 things in quick succession. He contacted the local government, warning them that the creation process was being altered and a higher quality gateway would be the result. However, they would need to ensure the area within 5 kilometers of the forge was clear. Secondly, he locked the whole forge down into 4 wartime protocols. No sense in making things more difficult than necessary. Jericho finished tightening his armor in place before putting on his helmet. He loved this look, and for an audiopath, that was most of the battle. Audiopaths work by one rule, and one rule only. In fact, it was the single greatest rule all humans live by. The rule of cool. The more it looked and felt badass, the better it would work. His greatest rival was fascinated with explosions. The crazy was obsessed with packing his forging process into micro-packets that were delivered via explosive impact. It looked cool, Jericho had to admit. However, it was lacking the manliness and sheer badassery of his style. Jericho felt the ancient Nordic peoples had the right idea in style. That, and he had drawn heavy inspiration from the Dwarven peoples. Weirdly enough, there were hundreds of Dwarven-like species who had evolved as excellent forgers throughout the universe, all who had that ancient Nordic feel to them. Lodu's species was in fact one of them. which had been part of the reason he had come to this world to test his theory. Each step he took was heavy, shaking the ground beneath it as he walked across the forge. Murphy had already set the lad in his location for safety. Nodding, he turned in front of his sky anvil. Formed of gel bullshitium, a name he had given the literally negative mass material that once solidified was indestructible, this anvil slab was the centerpiece of his forge. He took a hard step forward, and a deep note resonated in the room. His other foot followed, and a second sound joined the first. The two deep sounds echoed back and forth as the sound of a hammer strike joined in. Soon the room was filled with sounds that began forming a coherent piece of music. Then, the materials began arriving, and he lost himself in the work. Lodu could only listen in absolute amazement at what he was a witness to. The sounds were muffled, like heard deep underwater, as he listened to what was happening. What he could make out was a deep primal music. It moved his entire being, and he soon found himself lost in the experience. Murphy partitioned a small part of his mind off to keep track of events while he sunk deep into the work of Jericho. Throughout the planet, a wild intensity of passion and creativity, of gleeful work and productivity, of crafting and creating, filled the people. It was for nearly a month that the peoples of the planet experienced a renaissance. Breakthroughs in nearly every sector were happening daily. The people had felt the stirrings of the forge fires in their hearts for the first time in millennia. Luckily for Lodu, his Class 5 technology meant his body was strong enough to survive a month-long experience without break. Murphy had released a quantum probability field to help Lodu, just in case, as a precaution. Once Jericho was nearly done, he felt the sound waves all condense into the gateway, finalizing the end product. It was a masterpiece, a fully movable dual-sided infold gateway. It defied much of the rules that should have applied to it. Likely the only dual-sided or movable infold gateway in existence, and for sure, the only one that was both. Capable of connecting to two separate gateways at once, one from each side, the gateway would make this planet a shining jewel of trade. Lodu slowly felt himself come down from the experience. His people had old stories of the forge fires lighting up their souls. He, like nearly everyone else of his people, had written it off as old romantic ramblings. Now he knew better. The experience had been the spark that lit his soul fire ablaze. He could feel it now, deep within his mind. The solid crackle of the forge fire resounding throughout him. His own sound of the forge. The sound of a well-stoked fire, solid and steady. As Lodu came to terms with his experience, the people of his world were doing similar. Tears were freely shed as they realized what they had turned their backs on all this time. The call of the forge had awakened once again within them. There was something so deeply fulfilling in doing things the old ways as well. A renaissance of traditional ways was coming about, of using their technologies and knowledge to enhance the old ways, not to replace them. This had the effect of advancing their peoples into another level soon enough. No longer were they acting above their own unique gifts. Now they were allowing these primal parts of themselves to be enhanced instead of repressed by technology. Jericho slowly, and with reverence, put his armor up before looking over his work. It was glorious. It met the basic dimensions required, yet was so much more. He had engraved the gateway with stories from around the universe of travel, fire, trade, and passion. He made a deep scan of the work that he tied in with a recording of his forging it. He sent the package on to several groups he knew would want to see it. Mostly his family and some friends. Also that crazy Killian with his explosive fetish. Let's see Killian top this anytime soon. Ha!